Last weekend's Qatar Grand Prix brought arguably one of F1's biggest problems back into the spotlight: track limits. But what are track limits? Why are they a problem? And what can F1 and the FIA do about it? Track limits refers to the white line running around the edge of a circuit that the FIA uses to judge whether or not a driver has gone off track. By having a clear separation between what counts as the circuit itself and what is runoff, the FIA knows when a driver has gone off track and perhaps gained an advantage. But with F1 drivers being F1 drivers, they're always pushing the limits, especially in qualifying, and by using every single centimetre of track that they can gain valuable lap time. Inevitably though, in doing so, they sometimes exceed track limits and go beyond the white line, and if the FIA finds that they have done, their lap will be deleted. In a race they get more chances. After 3 strikes they get a warning, and on their 4th they receive a 5-second penalty. For each subsequent strike, the driver will automatically get another 5 seconds added to their time. This all sounds pretty clear and straightforward. So what's the problem? While the penalty system and the distinct white line should in theory make enforcing track limits easy for the FIA, in practice it's much more difficult. As with 20 different cars in the field, all potentially making tens of breaches per lap, there's a lot for the FIA to look over in deciding who gets a penalty and who doesn't. Where the breaches stack up, the FIA is left with a huge number to check over, which obviously takes a significant amount of manpower and time, which in a qualifying session they don't have, and so finding possible infringements can go on for a while. It's for this reason that we see drivers who find themselves knocked out of a qualifying session by just a few tenths stay in their car beyond the session's end, in the hopes that a driver ahead of them will get pinged for track limits and lose their lap time. But it's not just a problem for the FIA, it's also a problem for the drivers, who often struggle to just see the white line they're aiming to stay within. This is something Max Verstappen highlighted at this year's Austrian Grand Prix, saying it sounds very easy but it's not, because going through a corner can be a bit blind, and with understeer and tyre wear it's not so simple. This season's Austrian Grand Prix was a major example of F1's track limits problem, where the FIA reported that there were over 1,200 possible track limits offences during the Grand Prix. This sheer number of potential violations meant the FIA couldn't process them all during the race, and so we saw a huge shuffle of the on-track finishing order as significant additive time penalties were applied up and down the field, and 14 out of 20 drivers changed position. The biggest shock was a 30-second addition to Esteban Ocon's time, who during the race had believed he'd got away without a penalty. Because of this, we only got the final race result 5 hours after it finished, and the review into track limits post-race that resulted in this situation only happened because Aston Martin lodged a protest over unpunished infringements. After the Austrian Grand Prix, there was a huge debate over the state of track limits in F1, with almost every driver speaking out over how ridiculous the situation was. So why has it not really been mentioned again until last weekend in Qatar? Enforcing track limits is only really a problem on tracks where there are significant curbs or a lot of usable asphalt runoff, and many tracks between Austria and Qatar either had grass, gravel or walls right outside of the white line, so drivers had a distinct way of knowing where the limit was. But the Losail International Circuit is not one of these, and instead has large curbs that the drivers can run on to gain lap time, and also vast drivable asphalt runoff. In finding the limit and maximising lap time, drivers used these curbs and often went beyond the white line, resulting in lap time loss during qualifying. This most obviously affected the 2 McLarens during Friday's Grand Prix qualifying session, and lap time deletion meant Oscar and Lando ended the day in P6 and P10, where they could have been battling for P2 or even pole. During the race, however, the situation becomes more complex. The conditions of the Qatar Grand Prix were like nothing we've seen in Formula 1 in a long time, if ever, and the pure heat and dehydration the drivers suffered meant we saw Logan Sargent retire, others like Alex Albon heading to the medical centre post-race for fluids, and Esteban Ocon reporting that he had thrown up in his helmet multiple times. Lance Stroll also said that he'd been passing out in the high-speed, high G-force corners of the circuit. Yet despite these issues, the FIA continued to enforce track limits, and Lance himself earned 5 infringements and multiple penalties despite blacking out during the race, which he said was a joke. He raises a valid point. How in these circumstances can the FIA expect drivers to stay within the white lines? And where do they draw the line on what's enforceable and what's not? Solving this problem is not easy, but it is something that the FIA's president Mohammed Ben Sulayem has placed on the tracks themselves. In speaking with media earlier this week, he said he believes that the focus should not be on the FIA to police things more effectively, but instead that circuits where this has been an issue should solve it, or they'll risk losing their F1 races. He said, "The solution is to improve the track itself. I know some are resistant to it, but to tell you the truth, if they don't, there is no race. It's as simple as this. But what changes could circuits make? As the FIA has made it clear that it can't carry on as it is, and changes need to be implemented for next season. The most obvious solution is to deter drivers from even being tempted to use runoff or curbs to improve their lap times by adding gravel or grass outside the curb or white line. But this raises problems at tracks that F1 shares with other series like MotoGP for safety reasons. Solving this problem is incredibly nuanced, and Ben Sulayem highlighted this himself, saying that even even where you can add gravel, you have to consider its depth and how big it is. There's no easy answer to F1's track limits problem, but what is certain is that everyone agrees that something has to be done. The FIA finds itself in the middle of a difficult situation where loosening the rules could result in smoother sessions, but then where do they draw the line? Do you think F1 has a track limits problem, and what would your solution be? Let us know in the comments, like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to Apex for more deep dives into the F1 world.